what we're doing here, as you know, is we're going through the book of Daniel, and my friend John Lennox has a great book on the book of Daniel, and it's a perfect book, the book of Daniel, to read in today's culture, because Daniel was in a hostile culture to his faith, and so much of what goes on in the book of Daniel is applicable to us today, and John Lennox does a great job of unpacking all that. So if you want to go a lot deeper than what we can do here in the amount of time we have, get this book, Against the Flow, The Inspiration of Daniel in an Age of Relativism. And we're in our 6th lesson regarding Daniel, and we've pointed out before that the overview of Daniel is basically broken into 2 parts. The book is, the first 6 chapters deal with Daniel's ministry in Babylon, and the next 6 chapters deal with his vision of the future. Some of the visions that he has are long-term visions that haven't actually been come to fruition yet, and others have already occurred. But we'll get into that next time. We're still in, we're going to be in chapter 6 here today. And when we talk about Babylon, let's just get our geography right. Babylon is here, modern-day Iraq, just south of Baghdad. And as you can see, the Holy Land, Israel, is way over there. So these folks were taken in exile in 586 BC. Actually, Daniel was taken over to Babylon in about 605 BC. So Daniel is living most of his life in a hostile country or under captivity. He may have been 15, maybe 20 when they took him to Babylon in 605 BC. And so much goes on in Babylon that Daniel tells us about. Here are the 6 chapters, and some of these stories in Daniel are the most famous stories in the Bible. Even if you've never read the Bible, you know some of these stories. The first chapter deals with Daniel and wanting not to defile himself. That's where the Daniel diet comes from, which I happen to be in the middle of right now. My wife said, hey, we're going to do the Daniel diet in the first 3 weeks of the new year, which means all you can eat is tree bark and sunflower seeds. That's about it. No meat, no dairy, no bread. So it's pretty austere. Well, I had mushrooms and asparagus for dinner. So if I'm grouchy tonight, you know why, okay? But this is kind of like a spiritual thing. We'll try it. And I feel pretty good. I'm just grouchy all the time. I'm just hungry, all right? Interpreting the king's dream was chapter 2. Idolatry in the fiery furnace was chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar's second dream and conversion is in chapter 4. The handwriting on the wall, that's what we covered last time. Tonight we're in maybe the most famous story in all the Bible outside of stories about Jesus, and that's Daniel in the lion's den. Everyone's heard of this story. Again, even if you've never read the Bible. Now let's kind of go do an overview of these 6 chapters. Remember in chapter 1, Daniel wanted to remain unstained by the world, so despite the fact that the king wanted him to eat all these choice foods, he said, I'm not going to eat any of this, I'm not going to drink any of the wine, I just want to stay on fruits and vegetables basically. Now, we call this a diet of non-choice foods because you would never choose to eat any of these things that we're eating right now in our diet, in the Daniel diet. But Daniel did, and he looked better after about 10 days or so. He went on a later diet later on in the book, which we'll get to later. That was 3 weeks. That's the one we're doing. Chapter 2 deals with the succession of nations. Daniel has this dream, or actually Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, and Daniel interprets it. And Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and finally the everlasting kingdom are what come out of this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is superseded by the Medo-Persian kingdom in 539 BC, and that's where we're going to be today, right about 539, 538 BC when we get to chapter 6. Chapter 3 is the famous fiery furnace. They set up this image. Nebuchadnezzar sets up this image and says everybody has to bow down to it. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, we're not going to bow down, king, and our God will save us. And then they say, and even if he does not save us, we're not going to bow down. I mean, there's faith, right? There's trust in God, and then there's real trust in God. When you say, even if he doesn't save us, we're not going to bow down. That's the kind of faith Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had. And when Nebuchadnezzar threw him in the furnace, you remember the story, he sees 4 figures in there. Who's the 4th figure? Probably Jesus himself, the pre-incarnate Jesus. In Daniel 4, the sovereign God humbles the proud. Nebuchadnezzar actually becomes like a animal for 7 years because he got so proud and arrogant that the God of the universe humbled him. Later he regains his reason and he winds up praising the God of Daniel. In chapter 5, we covered this last time, the handwriting on the wall. We know exactly what date this occurred. It occurred October 12th, 539 BC. The handwriting on the wall. You remember this from last time? That the new king got a little bit too aggressive with his handling of the utensils that were taken from the temple in 586. He was using them to salute the Babylonian gods, and that was a no-no in Yahweh's eyes. So the hand comes out, writes basically the doom of this king on the wall, and he died that night. And why did he die that night? Well, we don't exactly know if he was killed by the invading army or if he just dropped dead. But that leads us to Daniel chapter 6, which is Daniel in the lion's den. And why does it lead us there? Because on October 12, 539 BC, Cyrus's army entered Babylon unopposed during a festival they were having there, and he got in by diverting the Euphrates River. And so he walks into the city, or at least his army walks into the city, and they take it over without really a fight. And what happens is he's greeted, or the army's greeted almost as liberators because they really didn't like the previous king. And Cyrus appoints this guy known as Darius the Mede as the king over this area in 539 BC. Now the question is, who is this Darius the Mede character? It's controversial as to actually who he is. Probably the best evidence points to a guy by the name of Gubaru, the former governor and general for King Belshazzar. That's the guy who had the handwriting on the wall, the doom spelled for him. Who, this guy, Gubaru, had defected to Cyrus partly because this guy, Belshazzar, killed Gubaru's only son in a fit of jealousy during a royal hunt. So when he sees Cyrus coming, even though he's one of the governors and generals for Belshazzar, he says, look, I know you're going to take this place over. Let me join you. Let me show you how to do it. And then it appears that what Cyrus did is he actually made him the king of this Babylonian area. Now Cyrus is the king of the whole empire, but he's the king here of Babylon. That's what it looks like. So that's kind of set the table now. Now we're in 539 BC, maybe 538 BC, when Daniel in the lion's den occurs. So if you got a Bible and you want to follow along, go to Daniel chapter 6. This is Daniel chapter 6. And here's what we read in Daniel chapter 6. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps, those are administrators, to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. So Daniel was going to be one of 3 guys over about 120. Think of a hierarchy, an organizational chart here. You got Darius up here. Then you got these 3 administrators, one of whom is Daniel, and then you've got the 120 below them. And why are they there? The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now, what do you think this is about? Might not suffer loss. Money, taxes. You don't want people stealing from the king, so the king says, I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen. This is kind of his IRS, I guess. And he says, I'm going to appoint these guys, and I'm going to make sure that nobody steals tax revenue. That's what it appears to be anyway, that they might not suffer loss. Now, Daniel was so distinguished, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional spirit that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So instead of him being one of the 3, the king was going to put Daniel over everybody. Now, exceptional spirit. Your translation may say exceptional qualities, but it literally means exceptional spirit. What do you think that means? Now, by the way, how old is Daniel at this time?
20-ish.
Huh? Now he's about 80. Right, 20 is when he is 605. He's about 80 years old now. He's got quite a history there. But now Daniel is actually about to lead his second empire. And he's not a military guy. Right? I mean, he's in exile. And they bring him into Babylon in 605, and he quickly distinguishes himself so much that he's basically put in charge of so much. And then later when the new guy comes in, when the Medes and the Persians come in, he's still seen as having an exceptional spirit. And the king there wants to put him in a administrative position, in a leadership position. Exceptional spirit. What might that mean? He's got character, he's got quality, he's got the right attitude. He's just somebody you look at and you go, I want to follow this guy. I can trust this guy. Now, the question is, do we have exceptional spirits? Do people recognize in us that there's something different about us? Something that they can trust? Something that exudes confidence but not cockiness? Somebody who looks like he knows where he's going? Somebody who can be trusted. I'm just throwing the question out. Because that's the exceptional spirit Daniel had, and people noticed. Remember, he's not even a military guy. He didn't bop somebody on the head to get this position. They just looked at him and said, this guy is a guy we need to put in leadership. So, Daniel was supposed to be set on top. Next section. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Now, why would they want to do this? Well, jealousy, one, yeah, it might be that. What might be the other reason? Yeah, you see, maybe they're the ones that were corrupt and wanted to take some of that tax money for themselves. This guy's going to be in the way. We got to get him out of the way. Is this real or what? I mean, this happens every day, doesn't it? 21st century. This is the 21st century, except this is 2,500 years ago. 2,600, whatever it was. They're unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. What does that mean? Neither corrupt nor negligent.
He didn't let things slip between his fingers.
He didn't let stuff slip between his fingers. They couldn't find any dirt on him personally or professionally. In other words, he was not corrupt in his character, nor was he incompetent in his work. He was competent. In fact, if somebody in your organization is not doing well, it's probably one of two reasons. It's either they don't know how to do it right, or they're corrupt. It's one of the two, right? Daniel was neither. He knew how to do things, and he wasn't corrupt. They couldn't find anything on this guy. Yet they wanted to. They wanted to get him out of the way. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. The law of his God. Why would they say that? I think for most of us in here, we could be corrupted by not following the law of God. These guys are saying about Daniel, the only way we could corrupt him is if we could maybe create a law where he would have to follow his God against the law we create. Notice how the rest of us are corrupted by not following the law of God. Daniel's going to be corrupted by following the law of God. That's how pure this guy was. That's how much of a straight arrow he was. So these guys had a plan. By the way, we've talked about this many times in this session before. What are the three main dangers or the three main reasons people commit any crime? Money, sex, and power. You got probably two of them in here, don't you? They want power and they also want the money. I don't know if sex was involved or not, but you got money and power right here. That could corrupt any one of us in this room. It's not going to corrupt Daniel for some reason. The only thing that's going to corrupt him is if they create a law that says you can't follow the law of God. Daniel's going to follow the law of God, and then they got him. So they have a plan, these other administrators. It's called the lion's den. And they're ready to get rid of this good guy for their own benefit. And here's what they do. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, "Oh, King Darius, live forever." There it is again, right? You notice that you're supposed to say that when you see the king. "Oh, king, live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed. Is that true? Have they all agreed? No. Come on. Do you think 120 went into the king? All these 100? No, all 120 didn't go. Do you think Daniel was there? And he said, "Yeah, let me sign on to this plan." No. So they're already lying. But they've all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Notice, how are they setting Darius up? Well, they're setting Darius up in a couple of ways. One way, they're saying, "Darius, you are now the mediator between God and man. Nobody should pray to their God. They can only pray to you." Presumably, then, Darius is going to pass the requests on to whatever gods they're praying to. So Darius is now the mediator between God and man. Secondly, they're going to set him up in such a way, as you'll see here in a minute, that his hands are tied. But they convince him to do this. Now, why might Darius think this is a good idea? We're speculating now. This isn't in the text, but why might Darius say, not a bad idea. Why should we do this? What do you think? What just happened? He just overthrew. They just set him up as the new leader. So what do you want to do as a new leader? You want to consolidate your power. You want to have a leader that you can unify around. You want to make sure that everybody's on board. And so this now makes sense to Darius. He says, "Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Why don't we do that? We'll just make sure who's really with me and who isn't. And anybody who doesn't want to be with me is going to be in a big trouble. They're going to get in the lion's den. I'm going to throw them right in there." So Darius agrees. And by the way, this is very common. This happened in Daniel chapter 3. Remember? Nebuchadnezzar sets up the image. It might have been Marduk. We don't know. That's the Babylonian god, the god that Nebuchadnezzar went after. It could have been himself. We don't know. But what the premise of this is here, the premise is that you want to unify around a figure, some kind of leader. The problem is, quite often, this is often propaganda. And let me give you some examples of this propaganda here. Now, let's take a look at, say, recent history. These were all over Russia. This, of course, means glory to the great Stalin. So the Soviet Union did this quite a bit. You might think the Nazis did. Yeah, they did too. Children, what do you know about your Führer? Doesn't he look like such a great guy, Hitler? This is just all propaganda. North Korea is doing this right now. North Korean propaganda poster right here. I don't even know what that says, but check out. These folks are victorious, aren't they? By the way, I have a friend who travels extensively. He's on up to about 180 countries now. And he has only not been to a few, like Yemen. He hasn't quite gotten there yet. He actually did get to North Korea. This is actually a picture that he took in North Korea. You'd go, wow, that looks pretty good. Well, this is their capital. And outside of this capital, there's not much good in North Korea. And as you can see right here, I think this is the dad and this is the son, or vice versa. This is right in the center of their capital, just pictures of their leaders. This is what you want to do. You want to make sure everyone unifies around a leader. This is another propaganda poster. Look what this is aiming at. The United States Capitol. Yeah, we want them to get nukes, don't we? In 2006, we went on a Noah's Ark expedition into Iran. Don't have time to tell you all the details, but when we got there, it happened to be the 17th anniversary of Ayatollah Khomeini's death. So no matter where we went, we saw these posters everywhere. They lined every street. They were on the sides of buildings. It was just oppressive. Everywhere you turned, you saw a picture of Ayatollah Khomeini. And we were in our bus driving through Tehran, and we pulled around a building, and this is what we saw on the side of the building. Is this propaganda or what? And of course, you remember what happened there in 1979, where so-called college students stormed the embassy gates, went over the walls, and took our American embassy workers hostage for 444 days until the day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. And then with the new sheriff in town, the Iranians wised up, and they let all the hostages go. Well, we were driving through Tehran. We said, hey, let's go look at the old embassy. Bring us over there. And so the bus driver said, okay, you can do it, but just don't take pictures. Okay. Hey, I didn't take it. Yeah, this is outside the old U.S. Embassy. They went over the gate somewhere in this area. It may have been on the other side of the embassy. It takes up a whole city block. And if you zoom in on that, this is the old United States seal that they chiseled off the side of the wall there. And right off of my left elbow, if you came down maybe 50 yards, this is on the wall. And then off my right, if you were to go right down another 50 yards, this is what you saw. We will make America face a severe defeat. They translated for us. Yeah. Quinn? Yeah.
Why were you there and how'd you get in there?
We were there for a Noah's Ark expedition. And we flew to Tehran and got on a bus. And
a whole bunch of people.
yeah, well, I'm sure they were keeping an eye on us. But actually, I don't know what the climate is now. It wasn't all that bad in 2006. It obviously wasn't great. But the Iranians want tourists.
Especially now.
Well, it looks like
Money.
with their signs.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, maybe not us, but we were walking we were walking on the streets in Tehran at one point, and a woman stops her car. She's in the full Muslim garb. She gets out of the car. She goes, "Are you from America?" "Yes." "I want to go to University of Massachusetts." Like, well, I just happen to be the registrar there. Why don't you just apply right here, you know? I mean...
So hostages who's got $5 million apiece.
Yeah.
The hostages from 1979 just got $5 million. Yeah, that was not worth it. But in any event, I mean, you got to feel for these people. They just want to get out of there. Actually, it's a beautiful country, and it's a pretty city, too. It's fallen down, but I mean, we went to a restaurant up in the north, and it's just all hilly, and it's beautiful up there. You keep going north, you're in a ski area, and if you go over the mountain, you wind up in the Caspian Sea.
Esther's tomb is in Hamadan.
Where's that?
Esther.
Esther's tomb, yes, of course.
Hamadan, Iran.
Yes.
It's outside of Tehran.
It's a very pretty country. And the people actually on the street were very nice. They were. It's the government that, you might imagine. And in fact, with regard to the hostages in 1979, one of the hostage takers wound up to be Ahmadinejad, who was their president until a couple of years ago. In any event, no extra charge for that. But the idea here is that this is what oppressive totalitarian regimes do. They try and unify around some kind of leader, and they put posters up, and of course in the case of Daniel, they're saying you can't pray to anybody but Darius. So let's go back to the text now. So these guys say to the king, "O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." You can't repeal a law from the Medes and the Persians. So Darius said, okay, let's put it in writing. So they did. They put all this in writing, which was going to be a problem here in a minute, as you'll see. Now, how do you think Daniel responded? When Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows were open toward Jerusalem. And what did he do? He prayed, just like he always did. And he faced Jerusalem. Solomon, in about 960 BC, when he dedicated the temple, said, face Jerusalem when you pray. So, I mean, it wasn't like a law at that point, but it was a kind of a custom or a tradition. So Daniel thought he'd do it, so he did, just like he always had. He faced Jerusalem. He didn't hide the fact that he was going to do it. He learned what they did, and he went ahead and did it anyway. Now, is there any malice in this? No, because he always had done this. It wasn't like he wasn't doing it and he said, well, I'll show you, Darius. He's been doing this all the time. That's why these administrators knew they could get Daniel, because they probably saw him doing this. He did not want in any way, I imagine, to make people think he had compromised. I mean, he could have shut the doors, right? He could have prayed silently, quietly in an area where nobody could see him, but then people would have said, hey, Daniel, have you compromised? So he just kept doing what he was doing. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So amazingly, they see him. Daniel, what are you doing? How can you do this? So what happens next? Well, let's ask a question. Daniel's devotion to God was not hidden. The question is your devotion to God hidden? Is my devotion to God hidden? Do people even know you're a Christian? They certainly knew where Daniel stood. He'd been consistent from the minute he got to Babylon. He's got like a 60-year testimony in that land. At this point, about 65-year testimony. And he hasn't compromised. Let me ask you a question. Where does our government culture or your job demand that you compromise?
On your religious beliefs in Jesus Christ.
How do they do that, Brian?
Well, there's laws that prevent you from giving people information verbally or in writing in schools, in government, open government, public buildings, as well as if you work for the government. And now there's a lot of corporations have nothing to do with the government, or might have a government contract, that are following suit, as well as the enforcement of alternate lifestyle laws that we're required to essentially comply with, up to and including the potential of having unisex bathrooms in churches.
No extra charge for this, but this is about to come to vote again in the City Council in February. You know, last year, when many of us signed that letter, we may have to do it again, because the other side is unrelenting in trying to put your wives, daughters, and children at risk. Of course, that's not their intent, right?
Well, don't forget the boys, the sons, because there's a perception, a widely held perception, that the homosexual agenda includes pedophilia, and they're not going to be interested in little girls.
Right, but the bathroom issue puts mostly women and children at risk. Right. From not homosexuals necessarily, but could be heterosexual predators, right? That's part of the problem. This country is moving further and further away from freedom and more toward political correctness, to the point that you are going to be called to compromise if you haven't been called already. Certainly if you're in the military, if you work in a public school system, if you work in any government capacity. In fact, if you have a contract with the government, you're a private vendor, but you contract with the government, in certain instances, you might not have certain freedoms anymore because you have to buy into the politically correct line. All I'm saying is, if it hasn't happened yet, it's coming. And the question is, are you going to be ready? What are you going to do? It's a good time to decide now. Back to the text. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you, O king, should be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. There's the second time they mention that. And this time the king says it can't be repealed. Now, isn't it ironic that they're saying a law of man can't be repealed, when in fact, what's the only law that really can't be repealed? The law of God. In fact, where do we get our laws from? Let's take a look at that for a second. What is the source of our laws, or what should be the source for our laws as a government? What did Jefferson think? That they're derived from God. Good laws are derived from God's good nature. In fact, he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So good laws are derived from God's nature, which is the very standard of good. Where do bad laws come from?
Politicians?
Well, politicians, yes. A derivative of man normally, rather than God. And in fact, bad laws are usually derived from selfish human desires. Here's a very pleasant poster for abortion. It's my body, my right, my choice. Has nothing to do with somebody else's right, like right to life. Somebody put it this way: abortion is just discrimination based on where you live. Because inside a mother is a living human being with its own DNA, its own blood type. It is a unique human being. Yet there are people out there who are saying, no, we're not going to obey God's law. And by the way, you don't have to be a Christian to know this. We're not going to obey the standard beyond us. We're going to make up our own standard. That has to do with me. Whatever I want. It's my body, my choice, my right. We mentioned in here last year that there are no rights to anything unless God exists. Why not?
Because there is no standard of right.
Yeah, everything's a matter of opinion. It's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. If there's no standard beyond you and Hitler, where do rights come from? So what atheists have to do, they have to steal rights from God while claiming God doesn't exist. There would be no right. Now they think, say, abortion is a right. We, of course, think that the right to life is the ultimate right, because if you don't have life, you don't have anything. The right to life is the right to all other rights. Without life, you don't have anything. So does a woman have the right to control her own body? Yeah, sure, unless she kills somebody else in the process, which is what's going on here. So rights come from God. And when men make up rights that are not derived from God's nature, we run into all sorts of trouble. I just learned about this today driving up here. I just put it in the presentation just about an hour ago. This is from the Daily Signal. You're not going to believe this. Maybe you will. This is a website newspaper. This was the headline just a couple of weeks ago. In New York, you could be fined $250,000 for failing to use a transgendered person's preferred pronoun. What? This is the New York Commission on Human Rights. And they said that if you're a business owner or I don't know if it applies to individuals or not, but if you decide that you're not going to call somebody who wants to be called a woman even though he's biologically a man, you can be fined up to $250,000. Because we've got to stamp out discrimination.
Sounds like New York values.
Yes, it does. It does sound like New York values. Newsflash, all laws discriminate. Every law discriminates. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. Who's being discriminated out here with this law? Just about everybody who's not transgender, right? Everybody's being discriminated against, except those who are transgendered. Why don't we have a law that says you could be fined $250,000 for failing to call somebody your majesty if that's their preferred pronoun? Look, I prefer to be called your majesty. If you don't call me your majesty, the New York Commission on Human Rights is going to fine you $250,000. I mean, this is just insane.
You better carry your certificate with you.
Yeah, that's right. What were you going to say, Jerry?
Does the at least have the chance to have the transgender tell you what they want to be called first? How are you going to know?
Well, I don't know. I don't know all the details of the law, but even if that were the case, suppose, because you...
It's a he said, she said.
Or it's a... It depends on... Well, it's a... You can't even use that expression anymore, Jerry. That's the whole point. You can't use that anymore. It's a he said, no, wait. It's a she said, no, wait. Yeah. Now, to be fair, this is rooted in a truth. What's the truth? That you ought to be polite to people, right? You ought to be polite. But do we have to have a nanny state that says if you're not polite, we're going to fine you $250,000? And what if the person who is being asked to call somebody else a certain pronoun is offended by doing that? What if they feel they have a conscious objection or a religious objection? They are now being discriminated against. You see, this is the nanny state run amok. This is a human law which is just pure nonsense. It's political correctness taking rights of other people away. In fact, most of the people away. New York has, what, 15 million people in it? According to this article, maybe 25,000 are transgendered, so to speak. So for the sake of 25,000, who may feel slighted if you don't use the right pronoun, we're going to potentially fine the other 15 million people $250,000. This is insane. I've noticed a difference. Here's a general way of looking at the difference between conservatives and liberals. Okay, a general way of looking at it. Conservative, what does that mean? You're trying to conserve what you know is right and true. That's what you're trying to do as a conservative. Doesn't mean you're not open to progress, you are, but what you know is right and true, you're trying to conserve. And what conservatives generally want to do is they want to change their behavior to fit reality, whereas liberals want to change reality to fit their behavior. That's what they want to do. They want to change reality. They have this fairy tale world that they want everybody to live in. Look, you can't change your gender. I'm sorry. Biologically, you're either a male or a female, notwithstanding very few people who are hermaphrodites, very few, but you don't set a whole policy based on the extreme exception. People are men or women. You can change your sexual behavior, but you can't change your gender. Yet liberals put it exactly opposite. They're saying you can't change your sexual behavior, but you can change your gender. Now, who's being scientific here? The liberals or the conservatives? The conservatives are. The conservatives are saying it's a scientific fact. That's a guy. It's a scientific fact. That's a female. And liberals are saying, oh, no, no. That's a stereotype. That's literally what they're saying. It's a stereotype. No, it's genetics, friends. It's genetics. So this is the basic difference between conservatives and liberals. Now, speaking of that, let me ask a question. Is civil disobedience ever right?
Sure. Yeah. Martin Luther King Day.
Martin Luther, it is. Here we are on Martin Luther King Day. He was civilly disobedient, wasn't he? How about this? But aren't you always supposed to tell the truth, right? How about this? You're living in Nazi Germany, and you're hiding Jews like Corrie ten Boom did. And you hear a knock at the door. Schnell, schnell! Hast du Juden here? And you
Nein.
You're not supposed to lie, Brian.
Yeah. Well,
What are you going to do? The authority, the government's there saying, Hast du Juden here? What are you supposed to say?
Repent later.
Not that I know of.
Repent later? Not that I know of. That's a lie.
They look like Protestants.
Nice try. It's another lie, Brian. You're really digging in deep.
Oh, yeah. I gotta go home early.
What do you do? What do you say? Do not bear false witness.
Stay silent.
You could choose to take that. There's a lot of different ethical theories, but I think the proper one is called graded absolutism. And that means that when you run into a conflict, the lower law gives way to the higher law. You have a greater obligation to protect innocent life than you do to tell the truth to a guilty murderer. Now, we see examples of this in the Scripture, don't we? Whereas one of the first we see with Moses. Moses and the Hebrew midwives. Remember Moses and the Hebrew midwives? Pharaoh wanted the babies killed, and the Hebrew midwives lied and said, oh, these Hebrew women, they give birth too quickly. We couldn't even see that one. He was out and gone. We don't know where he is. He's floating in the Nile River in a basket, right? How about Rahab and the spies? She lies because she has a greater obligation to protect innocent life than she does to tell the truth to people who want to do harm. How about when the apostles are brought before the authorities in Acts chapter 5, and they say, don't preach this stuff anymore. And what do the apostles say? Hey, we've got to obey God rather than man. So civil disobedience is exemplified in the Scriptures, and it's also exemplified, I think, in some of the great heroes of the great reformers of all time, like Martin Luther King. Now, what are the rules here, though? When can you be civil disobedient? Do you just be civil disobedient because you don't like a law? What are the standards? What
Goes against God's law.
goes against God's law? Law is unjust. Well, there's a lot of unjust laws. But what does it mean to be civilly disobedient? You personally. Are you civilly disobedient if there's a law that allows somebody else to sin? No. But you should be civilly disobedient if there's a law that requires you to sin. So, for example, when it compels you to sin, not merely allows other people to sin. For example, we have a law now through the activist Supreme Court called Roe v. Wade. It's really not a law because the Supreme Court doesn't set laws, but we in America think it does. And it says that there can be no restrictions on abortion anytime, anywhere. That's unjust. But we're not civilly disobedient over that because they're not forcing us to abort our children. Now, if we lived in China and they said you only get the one child per couple, and your wife's pregnant with the second child and they want to come abort that baby, that's when you're civilly disobedient. That's when you flee. Or you can be civilly disobedient when it prevents you from obeying God. This is the case with Daniel. They prevented him, or were trying to prevent him, from doing something he should have done, and that is pray to God. So Daniel didn't stop praying to God. So the other examples are right here in the book of Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, civil disobedience. Daniel, civil disobedience. Right here. So yes, there are reasons, or there are legitimate times to be civilly disobedient, and the time in the United States is getting closer and closer and closer. It's already happened with some people who are baking cakes, bakers, florists, photographers, wedding planners. They're saying, we can't do this. And the government's coming down on them for same-sex marriages. Back to the text. All right. Then they said to the king Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah. Oh, what are they doing here? He's an outsider. He's not one of us. This guy's not one of us, O king. He's not one of us. What might they be saying in your company now if you don't toe the line? This guy's not one of us. Yeah, he's one of these Christian guys. He's one of these outsiders. He's a troublemaker. He pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. Why was he greatly distressed? Because he loved Daniel. He didn't want it. He didn't want Daniel to go to the lion's den. So they set this guy up. They set Darius up. These other administrators did. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Here's the irony of the whole thing. Think about this. These administrators set up Darius to be the mediator between God and men, and yet now he's supposed to be the mediator between God and man, and he has no power. Right? He can't even get out of his own decree because they set him up. That's the ironic thing about it. Also, notice the people who say there is no objective morality, there is no God, they're outraged when you don't obey one of their laws. You notice that? They're outraged. They expect you to obey their laws, and it's a moral outrage to them when you don't. You know, Hitler believed in moral absolutes. I remember watching a documentary once on Hitler, and he had a General Rommel. You remember General Rommel? And they were talking about how Hitler didn't trust Rommel. Now, why would he say that? Why would the narrator say he didn't trust Rommel? Well, he needed to trust Rommel, right? Despite the fact that Hitler was a murderer, he expected his inner circle to operate by moral values. Notice that? He expected people to do what they said they were going to do, to carry out his orders. He expected to be able to trust people, that they would be men of integrity and do what he wanted them to do. You can't get away from moral values. Even if you're a psychotic murderer, you want people that you can trust. So he made every effort to do this, but to no avail. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." The third time they're saying this. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." And so there was Daniel in the lion's den. They sealed him up in there, I guess at sundown, and the king went home, and it said he couldn't eat, he wanted no entertainment, he couldn't sleep. He had been had by his own administrators, and obviously he didn't want Daniel to die. Then, as morning came, the king approached the lion's den and cried out in a troubled voice, "Daniel, are you there?" There's Daniel. Yeah, he's fine. And what does Daniel say? He says, "O king, live forever." There it is again. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed. He was overjoyed. And he was excited that Daniel had survived. And so he immediately said, "Let's get Daniel out of there." Now, it might be, I don't know this for sure, but Daniel was such an impressive figure that Daniel may have been the one that convinced Cyrus to allow the Jews to go home. I mean, think about that. Remember, Cyrus is the one who says, "Hey, go home, we'll help you build your temple." We covered this last time. "We'll help you build your temple. If anyone gets in your way, I'm going to tell them, get out of your way. Let them build the temple." So Cyrus is the one that sent the exiles home, and Cyrus is predicted by Isaiah 140 years in advance to do this. Daniel may have contributed to that by being such an impressive figure who was loyal to God. But then it gets a little dicey. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Amen. I got an amen on that. Whoa! But the wives and children too? Now, first of all, does this mean God approved of this? Not everything in the Bible that's recorded is commanded or approved of by God. If that were the case, every lie, every murder, every sin in the Bible would be approved by God. No. Just because it's recorded that this is what happened doesn't mean that God prescribed it. This is a description, not a prescription. However, this was the custom for the Medes and Persians. Why do you think they wanted to kill not only the parents, but the children? What might be the reason for that?
Bloodlines of bad decision making.
Generational, clean them out.
It's generation. Why?
Make an example.
What's that?
It's like vendetta, you don't have to deal with the kids.
You don't have to deal with it. What does that mean, Mike? Don't have to deal with the kids.
Revenge.
Yeah, revenge. So the kids don't grow up saying, okay, now we're going to take you out. That was the reasoning. I'm not saying it's legitimate reasoning. I'm just saying it's pragmatically right. Okay, you're certainly not going to have any trouble after that, but this is what they did. So this was a practice that was carried out in the Persian culture, and Darius decided to follow it. Then Darius issues this decree, and check out this decree. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. He performs signs and wonders. That's the purpose of miracles. What? To show people who God is. Signs and wonders aren't done for entertainment purposes. Signs and wonders are done to confirm a prophet from God, or to confirm that this guy speaks for me. And Darius is recognizing this. By the way, this goes beyond what Nebuchadnezzar said. You remember what Nebuchadnezzar said in chapter 4? He just said, basically, don't blaspheme the God of Daniel. Darius is saying, you need to revere the God of Daniel. He's going even beyond that. Now, what lessons can we take from Daniel 6? Many of them we've already spoken of, but let's look at one of them here. Extraordinary spirits are noticed even by unbelievers, but remember, you might have an extraordinary spirit and they may kill you. Why? Because some people will kill good people for money, sex, or power. God might save you, he might not. But don't compromise your integrity or compromise your sanctification, your worship of God for any of these things. Secondly, Daniel didn't hide his faith even under the threat of death. The question is, do we hide ours under lesser threats? I mean, at least not here in America yet. You're going to be killed for being a Christian. Not yet. But yet, we are more timid and more scared about what we believe, and yet we don't have the kind of threats that Daniel had. Daniel knew that if he was found doing what he was doing, he would be thrown in the lion's den. And yet we're real quiet and real timid. Why? It was Winston Churchill said, I think he said something like this. He said, courage is the first quality you need to have, because without that, you won't do anything else. If you don't have any courage, forget about all the other attributes. Well, you can't forget about them. They're going to come in handy in other contexts, but if you get into a dangerous situation and you don't have courage, your other attributes aren't going to matter, are they?
But do you think also, it says, do we hide ours for lesser threats? Maybe because Daniel's faith in God was much higher than ours, and therefore he didn't care really.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, when you're 80, but remember, Daniel has displayed this kind of courage before. I mean, he basically tells Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to become a werewolf for 7 years, or you're going to graze in the field like an ox for 7 years. He tells the king this because you're arrogant, king. He tells the king, no, I'm not going to eat your stuff. Sorry. Of course, he had seen some incredible things too. But that's a question that we need to ponder. Number 3, while temporal salvation is not guaranteed, God can save people, and of course his eternal kingdom will never be destroyed. Maybe the ultimate question we all have to ask ourselves is this: are you ready for civil disobedience? It's a lot closer than you think. And you know why it's happening? It's because we've been silent too long. The church has been silent too long. Christians are still a majority in this country, and yet Somehow we're getting pushed around by the minority. Yeah, the question is, will you compromise? That's the question. Will you?
The preceding program was brought to you by crossexamined.org.
God bless you indeed, and shalom, beloved ones. Join me as we go on a journey together, discovering how the writings in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament connect.
Discovering the Jewish Jesus, Sunday on NRB TV.
Jesus is the Son of God, and he did give his life as an atoning sacrifice for sin, and he did rise from the dead to prove that he's God, and he is alive today, and he is coming back, and he's changing people. This is all real.
Boldly preaching God's Word in truth and love on Walk in the Word with James McDonald, Sunday evenings right here on NRB TV.
When you have something wrong with your child that you can't fix, you feel very small and very weak.
I was hit by a drunk driver.
I don't remember any of the specifics of my injuries or the accident. I just know stuff was taken care of and I was able to focus on getting healed.
Our medical bills have been over $1 million, and the members at Medishare have faithfully paid our bills.
I think the thing that appeals to me most about Medishare is I'm not just a number. We are part of a family.
You're not only getting taken care of by a medical doctor, but you're also getting taken care of spiritually through the power of prayer.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 844-74-BIBLE. Medishare, affordable biblical health care. Call 844-74-BIBLE. That's 844-74-BIBLE.